Welcome back to Audacious History, the only place on the internet where we look back at our ancestors and collectively ask, what the actual flying fuck were you thinking? Today, we need to talk about the American presidency. Now, depending on your political leanings, you might think the modern White House is a bit of a circus. But I am here to tell you with absolute historical certainty that nothing, and I mean nothing, compares to the sheer unhinged frat house energy of the 1830s. Meet Andrew Jackson, 7th President of the United States, a man whose entire personality can be summarized as local warlord refuses to die out of sheer spite. This is a guy who fought anywhere between 13 and 100 duels, walked around with a bullet lodged near his heart for decades, and once beat a would-be assassin half to death with his own walking cane. He was chaotic, he was terrifying, and he treated the highest office in the land like a lawless saloon. To give you a baseline taste of the kind of household this man ran, when Jackson eventually died in 1845, his pet parrot, Pole, had to be physically removed from the funeral because it would not stop screaming a stream of horrific blue profanities that it had learned directly from the former president. The funeral attendees were literally blushing into their handkerchiefs because a bird was dropping F-bombs over a founding adjacent father. That is the level of chaotic energy we are dealing with. But as hilarious as a swearing parrot is, it is not Andrew Jackson's most audacious legacy. Not by a long shot. No, today we are diving into an event so rancid, so bafflingly lazy, and so profoundly sticky that it has gone down in history as the ultimate flex of presidential I don't give a fuck energy. I'm talking, of course, about the time Andrew Jackson received a 1,400-pound block of cheddar cheese, left it to rot in the White House foyer for 2 entire years, and then forced the American public to clean up his disgusting mess. Grab some air freshener, folks. It's about to get incredibly ripe. To understand how a giant block of dairy occupied the seat of American power for 24 months, you have to understand the precedent Jackson set from day one. When Jackson was elected, he styled himself as the champion of the common man. He hated the Washington elites, the fancy pants politicians, and anyone who used words with more than 3 syllables. So for his inauguration in 1829, he decided to open the doors of the White House to the general public. And surprise, surprise, if you invite a mob of unwashed, liquor-starved 19th century frontiersmen into a mansion filled with expensive rugs, they are going to trash the fucking place. It was an absolute disaster. People were tracking mud everywhere, smashing porcelain and crushing expensive furniture. It got so bad that Jackson's staff literally had to fill massive bathtubs with whiskey and orange punch and drag them onto the front lawn just to lure the feral crowd out of the building so the president wouldn't get crushed to death by his own fan club. So by the time 1835 rolled around, the White House staff was already suffering from profound, untreatable PTSD. They knew Jackson didn't care a damn about decorum. They knew he didn't care about maintenance. But nothing could have prepared them for Colonel Thomas S. Meacham. Colonel Meacham was a dairy farmer from Sandy Creek, New York, and an ardent disciple of Andrew Jackson. He looked at Jackson's common man brand and thought, you know what the leader of the free world needs? A dairy product that requires its own zip code. Meacham didn't just make a wheel of cheese. He engineered an absolute monument to agrarian madness. He took the milk from 150 cows, pooled it together, and formed a cheddar wheel that was 4 feet wide, 2 feet thick, and weighed a staggering 1,400 pounds. To put that into perspective, that is roughly the weight of a fully grown Holstein bull, or about 9,300 modern craft singles, all condensed into one single terrifying yellow monolith. It was wrapped in a massive utility belt of canvas, painted with patriotic slogans, and loaded onto a custom-built wagon drawn by a team of decorated horses. Meacham paraded this dairy leviathan across New York and down the East Coast, turning it into a massive public spectacle. People came from miles around just to gaze upon the great cheese. It was a triumph of American farming. It was a symbol of national pride. And it was heading straight for Andrew Jackson's front door. When the cheese arrived in Washington, D.C. in late 1835, Jackson was thrilled. He loved gifts, he loved attention, and he loved things that were aggressively oversized. He accepted the cheese with grand speeches, thanked Colonel Meacham for his service to his republic, and then gave his staff the worst order they would ever receive in their professional lives. Put it in the foyer! Now, if you're a normal human being with a functioning brain, you might ask, why the fuck didn't they eat it? Or better yet, why didn't they donate it to the poor, or chop it up and give it to the army, or literally put it anywhere else? The answer is simple. Andrew Jackson did not give a single solitary shit. He already had a smaller 700-pound cheese that he was working through. Yes, seriously, this was his second giant cheese. And he figured the 1,400-pounder would make a great conversation piece for visitors. So, right there, in the main entrance hall of the Executive Mansion, the very room where foreign dignitaries, ambassadors, and heads of state arrived to meet the leader of the American Republic, sat a half-ton block of coagulated cow juice. At first, it wasn't terrible. It was winter, the air was crisp, the cheese was firmly cured, and it just smelled like a slightly aggressive deli. But Washington, D.C. is not known for its pleasant, mild climate. Washington, D.C. is a literal swamp, and as the calendar flipped into 1836, spring arrived. And then, summer. Have you ever left a piece of cheddar on the counter for a weekend during July? It gets greasy. It sweats. It develops a weird, oily sheen that looks like it belongs on a toxic waste dump. Now, multiply that by 1,400 pounds. As the blazing summer heat slammed into Washington, the White House foyer turned into a literal torture chamber. The cheese began to age at an accelerated, terrifying rate. It started to sag under its own immense weight, turning from a perfect cylinder into a weeping yellow blob. It leaked grease. Oh God, the grease! Liters of rancid dairy fat seeped through the canvas wrapping, pooling onto the historic hardwood floors, staining the expensive rugs, and soaking into the baseboards. The entire entrance hall smelled like a dairy farm in August that had been hit by a mortar shell. But it wasn't just confined to the foyer. The White House in the 1830s didn't have air conditioning. It relied on open windows and cross breezes. This meant the putrid, heavy, suffocating stench of rotting cheddar was actively pumped through every single room in the mansion. It drifted into the East Room. It settled into the state dining room. It seeped into the upholstery, the curtains, the wallpaper, and the very clothes of anyone who dared step inside. Foreign ministers would arrive for high-stakes diplomatic negotiations, step through the front door, and immediately start dry-heaving into the nearest potted plant. Hey, do me a solid and support independent history storytelling by hitting that subscribe button. Done it? Awesome. Let's get back to the madness. By late 1836, the situation had reached a boiling point. Jackson's term was coming to an end, and his vice president, Martin Van Buren, had just won the election to become the next commander-in-chief. Van Buren was the polar opposite of Jackson. Where Jackson was a rough-around-the-edges, duel-loving frontiersman, Van Buren was a polished, immaculate politician from New York who wore silk vests, ruffled shirts, and took immense pride in cleanliness and decorum. He looked at the White House and saw a beautiful executive palace. Unfortunately, he also smelled the cheese. Legend has it that as the transition of power neared, Van Buren finally snapped. He couldn't take it anymore. He marched into the White House, determined to confront old Hickory about the biological weapon rotting in the entrance hall. "Andrew, Mr. President, General, I say this with the utmost respect for your service to this nation, but you have got to do something about the fucking cheese." "What's wrong with the cheese, Matty? It's a gift from the people. Fine New York cheddar. You should be proud. It's from your home state." "My home state did not intend for it to become a sentient entity, Andrew. It has been sitting there for 20 months. It is weeping. There is a literal moat of grease around it. I walked past it this morning and I swear to God it hissed at me." "Builds character, Martin. The Whigs are soft. The Washington elites are soft. And a little honest American dairy smell keeps a man grounded." "It's not a little smell, Andrew. The French ambassador refused to come inside yesterday. He delivered his diplomatic dispatches through the window because he said the foyer smelled like a dead horse stuffed with old socks. We are facing an international crisis of the nostrils." "Then the Frenchman can go back to Paris. I ain't moving it. Colonel Meacham gave that cheese to me, and it stays in my house until I say otherwise." "But it's about to be my house. I take office in March, Andrew. I cannot govern a nation from a building that smells like a wet dog wrapped in blue cheese and left in a furnace. I implore you, get rid of it." "Oh, I'll get rid of it, Martin. Don't you worry. I have a plan. On Washington's birthday, I am going to throw a little party, and I am going to invite a few friends over to help clean up." February 22nd, 1837, George Washington's birthday, and Andrew Jackson's final days in office. Jackson, true to his chaotic neutral alignment, decided that if he was going out with a bang. He put out a public notice in the newspapers. There would be no exclusive galas, no high society guest list. The White House doors were being thrown wide open, and the public was invited to partake in a grand celebration. The main attraction? Free cheese! Now, you might think the people of Washington would be skeptical. You might think they'd say, "Hey, isn't that the cheese that's been off-gassing in the foyer for 2 years? The one that smells like a crime scene?" But you must never underestimate the power of two things: 19th century poverty and the American love for free shit. By midday, an absolute horde had descended upon the executive mansion. We are talking about an estimated 10,000 people: frontiersmen, laborers, politicians, criminals, children, soldiers, a sea of humanity packed onto the lawn, pushing and shoving their way through the doors. The doors flew open and the mob surged into the foyer, and there it stood, the 1,400-pound cheddar monolith, stripped of its canvas, sweating under the glare of the chandeliers, radiating a stench that could peel paint off the walls. Did the crowd hesitate? Did they recoil in horror? Absolutely the fuck not! It was an absolute slaughterhouse of dairy. People didn't wait for polite slices to be handed out. They came armed with Bowie knives, pocket knives, spoons, and their own bare goddamn hands. Men were punching each other in the face over chunks of cheddar. Women were stuffing blocks of sweat-soaked cheese into their bonnets and aprons. The air in the foyer became a thick, hot fog of human body odor and ancient dairy. The noise was deafening, a chorus of smacking lips, grunting men, and the squelch of knives tearing through soft, oily cheese. According to eyewitness accounts, the entire 1,400-pound block of cheese vanished in less than 2 hours. 2 hours! 10,000 people ate, carved, and carted away nearly 3/4 of a ton of old, rotting cheese. But while the cheese itself was gone, the horror was only just beginning for poor Martin Van Buren. Because a mob of 10,000 people eating greasy cheddar in a crowded room does not leave a clean house. The crowd didn't just eat the cheese, they became the cheese. People were carrying chunks of cheddar in their pockets, leaking grease through their coats. As they wandered through the White House, they wiped their greasy, cheese-covered hands on the expensive damask curtains. They dropped crumbs onto the carpets, which were then trampled into a fine yellow paste by thousands of muddy boots. Pieces of cheese were accidentally kicked under sofas, behind portraits, and into corners, where they immediately began to rot all over again. When the last citizen finally stumbled out of the White House, drunk on cheese and patriotism, Andrew Jackson looked around the ruined, stinking foyer, presumably laughed his ass off, and packed his bags for Tennessee. He left office a few days later, completely satisfied with his work. Martin Van Buren moved in the next week, and he was met with a literal wasteland of dairy. The smell was so thick, so deeply embedded into the architecture, that the standard cleaning methods of the 1830s did absolutely nothing. Van Buren had to hire teams of cleaners to scrub the floors with lye and vinegar. He had to have all the carpets ripped out and burned. He had to wash the walls, repaint the entire entrance hall, and leave every single window in the building wide open for months. And even then, for the first year of his presidency, whenever it rained or got a little humid, the walls of the White House would literally weep the faint, ghostly smell of Andrew Jackson's 1,400-pound cheddar cheese. Van Buren's presidency was plagued by economic depression and political strife. But if you asked him what his biggest challenge was, he'd probably tell you it was trying to get the smell of a dead cow's milk out of his living room curtains. And that, my friends, is the story of the great White House cheese of 1837. It is a tale of political laziness, agrarian obsession, and the absolute audacity of a president who treated the executive mansion like a trashy frat house, let a ton of dairy rot in the hallway for 2 years, and then threw a wild party to make the American public clean it up for him. Honestly, you have to respect the sheer level of disrespect. Andrew Jackson was a terrifying, problematic, and utterly unhinged human being, but nobody can ever accuse him of being boring. If you want more stories of historical madness, absolute audacity, and things that your history books skip to save your sanity, make sure you like this video, leave a comment below telling me what you would do with 1,400 pounds of cheese, and subscribe to Audacious History. Until next time, keep it chaotic, keep it weird, and for the love of God, keep your dairy in the fridge. Bye, guys.